details and emotional revelations during her first sit-down interview. Senior correspondent Brian Inton has the very latest.
Somewhere in a Pima County evidence lot under the harsh, unyielding glare of the Arizona sun sits a car. It has been there for 60 days. It is silent, gathering a fine layer of desert grit, but to those investigating the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, this vehicle screams. It belongs to the last man to see Nancy alive, Tommaso. FBI technicians didn't just search this car, they performed a mechanical autopsy. They took it apart, piece by piece, panel by panel, searching for a microscopic drop of blood, a stray fiber, or a digital footprint that shouldn't be there. After weeks of forensic scrutiny, the official report came back. Nothing of substance. No DNA, no struggle, nothing. In a typical investigation, nothing means a dead end. In a typical investigation, the car is returned with an apology for the inconvenience. But this is not a typical investigation. 60 days later, the FBI is still holding the keys. Tommaso's wife had her vehicle returned weeks ago. It remains in state custody, a metal ghost in a locked lot. Pause for dramatic effect. While that car sits in silence, the desert behind Tommaso's home has begun to speak. 3 separate times, clothing items have manifested in the dry wash directly behind his property line. Tan pants, a woman's shirt, a knee brace, and then 16 days later, dark garments. Each time the sheriff arrives. Each time the items are bagged and tagged. And each time silence follows. But the silence is breaking. Investigators have now confirmed a detail that chills the blood. Nancy's blood trail leads directly to her front door, pointing toward the street, toward a waiting vehicle, and toward the back of a story that Tommaso has been telling for 2 months. The evidence doesn't openly accuse him yet, but it refuses to look anywhere else. Stay with me, because we are going back to the night the desert swallowed Nancy Guthrie, and we are going to look at the evidence the FBI is refusing to give back. The last dinner. To understand the tragedy, we have to look at the woman at the center of it. Nancy Guthrie wasn't just a name in a headline. She was a matriarch, an 84-year-old woman whose mobility was failing but whose spirit was a shining light to her family, including her daughter, the well-known journalist Savannah Guthrie. On the evening of January 31, 2026, life felt normal. It was a family dinner at the home of her daughter Annie and her son-in-law, Tommaso. There was laughter, the smell of home-cooked food, and the comfort of kinship. But as the desert sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere began to shift. At approximately 9:45 p.m., Tommaso helped Nancy into his car to drive her the short distance back to her residence in the upscale Catalina foothills. According to the Pima County Sheriff's confirmed timeline, the garage door at Nancy's home groaned open at 9:48 p.m. It clicked shut at 9:50 p.m. 2 minutes. Tommaso told investigators he sat in his idling car, watching the door descend, ensuring his mother-in-law was safe inside before he put the car in reverse and drove away. He is, by all legal accounts, the last person to have seen Nancy Guthrie alive. What happened in the next 3 hours and 57 minutes is a black hole. No witnesses, no phone calls, just the hum of the desert night. Until 1:47 a.m. That was when the nightmare took a physical shape. On the recovered doorbell camera footage, a man appears. He is masked. He is armed with a firearm holstered awkwardly on his hip. He carries a backpack and, most chillingly, a walkie-talkie, suggesting he wasn't working alone. Someone was on the other end of that radio. Someone was watching. This wasn't a random prowler. As he stepped onto the porch, he didn't look around for cameras. He didn't hesitate. He walked directly to the lens with the precision of someone who had memorized the floor plan. He reached out a gloved hand, covered the view with vegetation from a nearby potted plant, and then disconnected the feed entirely. The screen went black, and Nancy Guthrie vanished. If you are following the Nancy Guthrie case, Every major development is covered here within hours of breaking. To ensure you don't miss the moment the truth comes out, like this video, subscribe to True Crime Threads and turn on all notifications. The desert hides many things, but it cannot hide them forever. The gap between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. is where the investigation begins to bleed into the realm of the calculated. For nearly 4 hours, Nancy Guthrie was alone in her home, a woman who struggled to walk to her own mailbox, now a prisoner of the shadows. But the question that has haunted federal investigators isn't just who took her, it's how they knew exactly when to strike. Former FBI agent Kathleen Becker Coffindaffer raised a possibility that reframes every second Nancy spent at the Shinny household that final evening. She posed a chilling investigative question. Is it possible that Nancy Guthrie was tracked? Not followed by a car idling down the street, not watched by a predator in the bushes. Tracked. The theory suggests a GPS device, small, silent, and precise, placed on Nancy's person, her clothing, or her handbag during the hours she spent at dinner with Tommaso and Annie. It would explain the surgical precision of the abduction. The masked man didn't need to scout the house. He was watching a digital signal. He knew the exact moment the garage door closed. He knew exactly when the house went quiet. And he knew exactly how long he had before the sun rose over the Santa Catalina Mountains. This signal, if it existed, didn't start in a dark alley. It started at the dinner table. When the sun finally rose on February 1st, the local church livestream began, but Nancy's seat remained empty. Within hours, the family converged on the Foothills property. According to Savannah Guthrie's own account, Annie and Tommaso were the first to arrive. They were the first to walk through those doors. They were the first to see the evidence of a life interrupted. What happened next was a display of immediate, jarring certainty. Before the Pima County Sheriff's Department had even unspooled their yellow tape, before a single forensic technician had dusted for prints, the conclusion was already reached. Annie and Tommaso didn't wonder if Nancy had fallen. They didn't call the local hospitals to see if she'd been admitted in a state of confusion. They looked at the propped open back doors and the missing phone, and they declared it kidnapping. In the world of behavioral science, that speed of certainty is a double-edged sword. To a grieving family, it is the intuition of love, knowing a matriarch's physical limitations so well that any other explanation is impossible. But to a cold-eyed investigator, it is a red flag. Most families cling to the hope of a mundane explanation for hours, even days. To skip the searching phase and go straight to the abduction phase suggests a mind that has already processed the horror before it was even revealed. And then there is the utility box. Just around the corner from Nancy's home, a central hub for the neighborhood's internet and security systems was found tampered with, damaged intentionally to trigger an outage. It was a blackout designed to blind the neighborhood, digital eyes. This wasn't the work of a desperate addict or a wandering transient. This was the architecture of a professional. The masked man on the porch, the walkie-talkie, the vegetation used to mask the camera, and the precision of the timing, all of it points to a predator who didn't just stumble upon Nancy Guthrie. They were invited into her world by someone who knew her schedule, her house, and her vulnerabilities. As the investigation deepened, the focus didn't just stay on the crime scene. It drifted back, like the desert wind, toward the man who held the keys to the last car she ever rode in. The FBI began to look at the nothing they found in Tommaso's vehicle and started wondering if the absence of evidence was, in itself, a piece of evidence. They began to look at the back of his property. They began to look at the wash. And they began to realize that the man Savannah Guthrie called Tommy was standing at the center of a storm that was only just beginning to howl. The investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie was never going to be a simple search and rescue. From the moment the Pima County Sheriff's Department stepped onto that Foothills property, they weren't looking at a random act of violence. They were looking at a blueprint. To understand the gravity of what happened at 1:47 a.m., you have to look at the mechanical precision of the intruder. This was a man who moved with a terrifying familiarity. He didn't just find the doorbell camera, he neutralized it as if he'd practiced the motion in his sleep. But it wasn't just the camera. Investigators quickly discovered a utility box around the corner from Nancy's house had been systematically damaged. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. The damage was calculated to disrupt the internet and surveillance systems of the surrounding homes, creating a digital blind spot exactly when the abduction was set to occur. This is the point where the professional meets the personal. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Moore and former Deputy Director Andrew McCabe both scrutinized the footage of the masked man. Their assessment was jarring. The suspect didn't look like a soldier. His weapon was holstered improperly, in a way no trained federal agent or military professional would ever carry a sidearm. He was an amateur in the gear of a professional. And yet this amateur knew exactly where the cameras were. He knew how to kill the neighborhood's Wi-Fi. He knew the layout of Nancy's home well enough to enter through the back and exit through the front. How does an untrained individual possess the intimate knowledge of a high-security residence? The answer may lie in the 4-hour gap between Tommaso dropping Nancy off and the intruder appearing on the porch. If there was no car idling on the street and no figure watching from the desert wash, then the intruder wasn't watching the house. He was watching a data point. The theory of a tracking device, placed on Nancy during her final dinner at the Shinny home, begins to bridge the gap between the amateur's clumsy holster and his lethal precision. If you have a signal, you don't need to be a scout. You just need to follow the dot on the screen. But as the FBI began to trace the digital trails, the physical world began to offer up its own grim evidence. Not at Nancy's house, not in the city, but in the quiet, dusty geography of the desert wash that snakes directly behind the property line of Tommaso. On March 12th, 40 days after Nancy vanished, the silence of that wash was broken. An investigator walking the terrain found a pair of tan pants and a knee brace discarded in the brush. Hours later, a second searcher found a woman's shirt, consistent with night clothes, nearby. The Pima County Sheriff's Department didn't hold a press conference. They didn't say the clothes belonged to Nancy. But they did something more telling. They collected them. They took them into evidence. And then they waited. Because 16 days later, the wash would yield more. Dark clothing, multiple pieces, found in the same proximity to the home where Nancy Guthrie ate her last meal. Front of her house, back of his. The blood trail at the Guthrie residence confirms Nancy was taken out through the front door. The items in the wash keep appearing at the back of Tommaso's property. It is a geographic axis that the FBI has been quietly measuring for 60 days. A line drawn in the sand that leads from a daughter's dinner table to a mother's empty bed. And while the world waited for an arrest, the man at the center of that axis was about to receive a clearance that would shock the legal community, issued by a sheriff whose own career was about to catch fire. On February 16, 2026, just 16 days into the search, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos did something that halted the momentum of public suspicion. He stepped behind a podium and issued a total, unequivocal clearance of Nancy Guthrie's entire family. He didn't just call them witnesses, he called them victims. He went further, labeling any suggestion of their involvement as cruel. But in the cold, analytical world of federal investigation, a clearance is only as strong as the evidence that supports it. And on day 16, the evidence was still in the lab. The DNA results from the Guthrie home had not yet been returned. The gloves recovered near the property were still being processed for touch DNA. The doorbell camera footage was still undergoing a frame-by-frame forensic reconstruction by the FBI. To issue a clean bill of health before the science isn't a legal conclusion. It's a statement of belief. and the man making that statement was about to lose his own footing. By March 24th, the Pima County Board of Supervisors took a step that shattered the sheriff's authority. They passed a vote of no confidence in Chris Nanos. They cited documented disciplinary issues and discrepancies on his professional resume. They required him to submit reports under oath. The man who told the world that Tommaso was cleared was now a man whose own credibility was being dismantled by the state. This is where the legal reality of the Guthrie case becomes a labyrinth. Former FBI agent Kathleen Becker Coffindaffer pointed out a detail that most observers missed. Every search conducted on the Shinnie property, their home, and their vehicles was a consent search. They weren't compelled by a judge. They weren't the result of a warrant. The family simply said yes. While that looks like cooperation, Coffindaffer's professional assessment was blunt. If I have probable cause, I'm not going to get consent. In the eyes of the law, the FBI hasn't moved on Tommaso because they haven't been able to convince a judge they have enough to take what they want. For 60 days, the full weight of an international task force, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit has been pressing against this case. And yet, they have not sought a single warrant against this man. That silence is a legal signal. It says that despite the car in the lot, despite the clothes in the wash, and despite the tracking theory, the evidentiary bar for a move has not been met. But as the legal walls remained stationary, the emotional ones began to crumble. Savannah Guthrie, a woman who has spent decades asking the hard questions of others, found herself answering them. On the Today Show, her voice didn't just carry grief, it carried a shield. She defended her family with the precision of a seasoned journalist, but it was one specific name she whispered to the camera that changed the narrative. "I'm sorry to Tommy." An apology issued on national television to the man at the center of the storm, a public staking of her own reputation on his innocence. But as Savannah's words hung in the air, the physical evidence in the Pima County evidence lot remained. The car was still in pieces. The blood trail still pointed to the street, and the FBI was about to look closer at the carpet shoes. The professional tools found near the home that suggested this wasn't a family dinner gone wrong, but a hit carried out by a ghost. While the public was fixated on family dynamics and televised apologies, the physical evidence was whispering a different story, one of professional tradecraft. On March 18th, an independent investigator named Jim made a discovery in a dilapidated building near Nancy's home that shifted the entire profile of the abductor. He found carpet shoes. In the world of border operations and high-level smuggling, carpet shoes are not footwear. They are a tactical choice. By wrapping soles in thick carpet or specialized fabric, a person can move across the jagged Arizona terrain without leaving a single, identifiable footprint. They are designed to make a human being invisible to trackers. This discovery, verified by front-page detectives, added a layer of chilling sophistication to the amateur with the poorly holstered gun. If the intruder was an amateur, he was an amateur who knew how to use the tools of a professional ghost. But how do these professional tools reconcile with the nothing found in Tommaso's car? Crime analyst Dave Mack reported a detail that has become the focal point of forensic debate. Tommaso's vehicle was completely dismantled, not just searched but surgically deconstructed. Every panel was pulled, every seat removed, every hidden compartment exposed. And yet the lab results were a total vacuum, not a fiber from Nancy's clothing. Not a microscopic speck of her DNA. Nothing. For 60 days, that car has sat in the Pima County evidence lot. Annie Guthrie's car was returned weeks ago. If the logic for holding a vehicle was purely about the time required for testing, both cars would be back in the family's driveway. They are not. Legal analyst Krieger suggests the reason is not forensic, but strategic. By keeping the car, the FBI is preserving a chain of custody. It is a move made for a jury's mind, allowing a prosecutor to one day stand in a courtroom and prove that the vehicle has remained untouched and unaltered since the very first day of the investigation. It is the language of preparation for a legal proceeding that has not yet been announced. And then there are the polygraphs. Chad Ayers, speaking on Megyn Kelly's platform, revealed that Tommaso didn't just pass his polygraph, he passed with flying colors. In the eyes of his defenders, this is the ultimate proof of innocence. A man who had just kidnapped his mother-in-law would surely falter under the physiological pressure of a lie detector. But deception experts offer a haunting counter-perspective. A person who is highly practiced, incredibly calm, or capable of profound compartmentalization can navigate a polygraph without a flicker of guilt. The test measures stress, not truth. So we are left with two conflicting profiles. One is the man Robin Dreeke describes, a professional criminal, a transactional predator with no emotional tie to Nancy, who identified a vulnerable target and executed a plan involving carpet shoes, damaged utility boxes, and radio coordination. The other is the man the geography points to, the man whose car won't be returned, whose mother-in-law's blood trail points toward his exit, and whose backyard wash keeps producing pieces of clothing that shouldn't be there. 60 days have passed. The FBI has the car. They have the wash items. They have the DNA, the genetic genealogy, and 10,000 hours of surveillance footage. They have an international task force and the full authority of the United States government. And yet Nancy Guthrie's bed remains empty. Her daughter Savannah still wakes up in the dark, imagining the terror of that night. The $1,000,000 reward sits unclaimed. The evidence doesn't accuse Tommaso, but it refuses to look away. Who do you believe was on the other end of that walkie-talkie? Was it a professional hit or a family secret buried in the desert? Drop your theory in the comments. This community sees details the headlines miss. As the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie crossed the 60-day mark, the courtroom wasn't made of wood and marble. It was constructed on television screens and social media feeds. This is the stage where the silent move of the FBI meets the loud defense of a high-profile family. The most powerful piece of counter-evidence in this entire saga isn't a lab report. It is an absence. In 2 months of exhaustive searching, through every digital and physical layer of Tommaso's life, the FBI has not moved for a probable cause warrant. In the world of federal prosecution, this is a deafening silence. Federal agents do not miss warrants. If they had the evidentiary foundation to compel a search or an arrest, they would have taken it. The fact that they haven't tells us that, legally, the bar for the back of his theory has not been cleared. Nancy Grace, a woman who has built a career on the relentless pursuit of justice for victims, has remained focused not on the family but on the predator. She has called for the ultimate penalty, not for a son-in-law, but for the masked figure who carried an 84-year-old woman into the darkness. To Grace, and to many seasoned analysts, the profile doesn't fit a family dinner gone wrong. It fits a transaction. We must look at the source of the wash discoveries with a critical eye. The man who first photographed the tan pants and knee brace, Jonathan Lee Riches, carries a history that complicates the narrative. A convicted felon with a documented past of filing thousands of frivolous lawsuits, his involvement introduces a credibility gap that investigators cannot ignore. Is it possible the clothing in the wash was a plant? Or perhaps, more likely, is it simply the debris of a high-traffic transit corridor? The Catalina foothills sit 70 miles from the Mexican border. These washes are known veins for smuggling and human trafficking. In this terrain, discarded clothing isn't a smoking gun, it's the baseline. Former FBI behavioral expert Robin Dreeke offers a chillingly grounded perspective. He believes that when the capture finally happens, it will be described as underwhelming. Not a cinematic family conspiracy, but a cold, calculated move by a professional criminal who saw a vulnerable target and moved with the clinical detachment of a ghost. This profile points away from the dinner table and toward the shadows of the border. Yet we are left with the two realities of this case, existing simultaneously, neither canceling the other out. One reality: Tommaso is a cleared man. He is a man who cooperated, who passed his tests, and who has the unwavering support of one of the most respected journalists in the country. He is a victim of a narrative that the evidence has yet to prove. The second reality: the car is still in the lot. The clothing keeps appearing behind his house. The blood trail leads to his path, and the FBI, while silent, is not still. They are processing the DNA. They are tracing the genetic genealogy. They are waiting for the science to catch up to the suspicion. 60 days, no arrest, no Nancy. The investigation remains in a state of high-tension equilibrium. But in the desert, things don't stay buried forever. The next development could be a DNA match, a witness coming forward, or a confession whispered in the dark. Until then, the empty chair at the Guthrie table remains a haunting reminder of the cost of this mystery. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. A $1 million reward is waiting for the truth. Someone knows where she is. Is it you? Don't let this story fade into the desert heat. Share this video, comment with your thoughts on the carpet shoes discovery, and subscribe to True Crime Threads. We are watching the evidence, and we aren't going anywhere until there is justice for Nancy.